Welcome to the Leading Together podcast. I'm Sean Lee, joined as always by my co-host Joe Olig. Joe, how's it going today?
Going good. Yeah, feeling a little sore this afternoon. I got the call up for a little, probably was about over 40 men's soccer league last night. Haven't played in a while.
Yeah?
It was great, but I'm feeling it today.
How'd you do? Score, get an assist or
Oh,
anything?
I got a few assists. No,
Okay,
should have had a couple goals.
nice.
But
Are you playing in your traditional position, playing out of position? What was going on?
yeah, out of position in that number 9 spot. Never felt too comfortable there. So
Nice,
should
nice.
have had a couple of goals. Did not.
Yeah, that's why we
Yeah,
got to get you in the weight room for that spot, huh?
yeah. Yeah, we gave up a lead. It was classic Austin FC, St. Louis City
Mm,
FC. Gave up 3 goals in the last 5 minutes
mm, yeah.
to yeah. How you doing?
Well, I'm good. Yeah, I'm excited. My son's birthday is today, actually. He's
Oh, nice.
13, so I got a second teenager. So
Yeah,
we kind of already celebrated with a little epic trip, me and him, but we'll do a dinner tonight and get him a few gifts and cake. So should be fun.
nice. That's a big one. 13.
Yeah, I know. It
Happy
is a big
birthday,
one.
Eli.
Yeah, happy birthday, Eli. Big man. Always looks like a giant kid.
Love it.
Cool. Well, I'm also just real excited about our episode today. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite teams, the San Antonio Spurs. And to help us frame this episode, we're really just going to kind of explore a little bit about the unique culture they created. And we're doing this primarily because they're a rare example of a team in sports that truly sees the critical relationship between trust and psych safety and reaching the highest levels of success. But we're also using them because we want to honor Coach Pop, who just recently retired. So we love him and we want to honor him, and so we thought it'd be timely to talk about the great culture they've created and how much they believe in and trust in psych safety. So I'm going to start for our audience just sharing a few things about the San Antonio Spurs. I recognize that probably not everyone listening to this is as big of a basketball fan or San Antonio Spurs fan as I am, and to some degree Joe is. So let's start by looking at Coach Pop's leadership philosophy. He had this mantra that everyone around him just came to know to be true, and it was this idea of people before players. So Pop is known for building real personal relationships with each team member. He's just as likely to talk to players about their family or their favorite wine as he is some very complex defensive scheme and their exact assignment for where they need to be at any given moment in time. He's also known for modeling vulnerability, which might be a surprise to some folks that maybe just saw him do a sideline report. But for those that get closest to him, what he's known for is often admitting mistakes, regularly asking for feedback, and always encouraging open dialogue in team settings. And another way that he would build trust and psych safety was through encouraging disagreement and open dialogue from everyone. And lastly, he created a sense of belonging by inviting players to share their cultures, their food, and their traditions. And even more context about the Spurs, they were one of the very first, if not the first NBA franchise to really recruit from around the entire world. That's very normal now, but 25 years ago when they started this trend, it was very unusual to have players from Australia, Argentina, and France like on the same NBA roster. They were really the first ones to do that. And as you can imagine, people from those different backgrounds don't just like naturally all get along, right? It takes some intentional work of getting to know each other, and they really work to create an environment where they did get to know each other and their unique backgrounds. So the result, 22 consecutive playoff appearances, 5 championships, and sustained success even through significant years of transition, like one of the best players of all time, Tim Duncan, retiring, and some of their other best players moving on and coaching changes.
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
Joe, why don't you help
Yeah.
set up our episode?
Yeah, so there's lots of great research out there to suggest that this psych safety, this trust, this relational, culture that Pop created is essential to becoming a high performing team. So we've got sort of this exemplar in the Spurs. There's loads of research out there that suggests that these are the ingredients for a high performing team. So today we want to unpack that a little bit. We want to look at what does it take to build psychological safety within a team, and we also want to debate a little bit the idea that there might be something even more foundational to that trust and psychological safety that we know is so important for the success of a team. Um, Move beyond some of maybe what our audience might already know about this, and try to cover some new growth areas for us. So yeah, you want to kick off with our big three questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that framing. I think the first question here is simply how can teams practically get started towards building psych safety? And one thing to say, I think it's becoming increasingly understood that like you need to do this, and I think yet we see in our work with a lot of different teams, there's still a lot of wondering about how do we practically do this.
It's great. Yeah. So I love this question because it's what oftentimes our community comes to us and asks us about. And where I know we're going to go later in the episode is, to some of these specific behaviors that we can be mindful of, develop skill around, and work to really intentionally put those into practice that help on a day-to-day basis build safety amongst our teams, psychological safety amongst our teams. But what we found in our practice is that that doesn't always work, and sometimes we'll walk
Curveball here, Joe.
curveball. I'm throwing a curveball, right? If we look back at some of the teams we've worked with, and we hear the reflections from leaders who've came in and said, "Well, we've tried some of these things." What we sort of uncover is that there's a prereq when it comes to creating a culture of psychological safety and trust, right? And it's going to sound pretty basic, but it's real. And it's this idea that you really believe that people inside your organization matter, right? And that they feel it, right? So if you have a culture where people don't have a sense that they really have value, or they matter within the organization, and they sort of just see themselves as a human resource, right? And you come in and try to implement strategies to build psychological safety, it's going to fall flat. It's going to
Mm,
appear disingenuous, right?
yeah.
And so it's essentially, we're trying to apply a tactic, a strategy to create a culture of psychological safety. But if we look around the team and we say, I don't really feel like I matter here, right? This doesn't feel like a place that truly values the people element. Um, it's gonna fall flat, right? So, and I think there's some real discovery for a team to get into when that's the case, because it doesn't always, if that's maybe true for you, it doesn't always mean that you're a bad person, right? And you just inherently don't care about people. It just might mean that the current systems, right, and some of the current behaviors don't communicate to people, right, that they really matter. So
Yeah.
it starts with creating this culture, right, where people matter. So if we go up to Pop, right, some of the initial things that he would do with his players is get to know them on a one-on-one level. Tell me about
Mm,
your parents, right? What was it like to grow up in France? These sorts of things. And just immediately the culture is communicating, you're right, this place, they care about me, right? It's like I'm more than just a player or a number or an employee in this position. So um yeah, I think there's this foundational piece that when it comes to getting started with psych safety, we need to assess where are we at when it comes to that variable inside of our team culture.
yeah, I love that, Joe, because I think what I hear you offering is like a strong, like almost warning or caution. And I think it's like I think there's a temptation for all of us that as we increasingly believe and see the connection between psych safety, trust, and as a foundation to build a high performing team, that we can immediately just sort of say like, well, what are the shortcuts? Like,
Yeah.
how do I just
Yeah.
do these tactical things, put these practices in place, and get that so that I can achieve high performance,
That's right.
right? And become more cohesive. And what I'm hearing you say is, well, first we have to really make sure our intentions are correct and pure and authentic.
Hmm.
And again, back to the Spurs, I think that seems to be the reason they were able to be so cohesive is that the coaches, players et cetera, felt that in a really sincere way, and it became contagious, right? We talked a lot about Pop, but the reality is Pop couldn't do that alone. It became everybody bought into this belief of like we really have to see each other like for the fullness of what we can offer and our potential,
Hmm.
and and that naturally leads into things like um, being vulnerable, admitting mistakes,
Yeah.
and I think maybe even something we talked about earlier was, we're a little team, and we've given each other feedback, and
Hmm.
it's been really helpful for us to be better teammates to each other.
Yeah.
And as we were even preparing for this, I think my reflection was, well, why do we do that? Why would we take action and want to improve on the feedback we're giving each other? It's like, well, because we care about each other, right? And because I want you to have the best experience you can have. You want me to have the best experience. So you want to show up and be a good teammate, right?
Yeah.
So, but that
Yeah.
starts with like a care for each other and for our teammates.
Yeah. So I think so once you have that, right, once you've established that, you know that to be true, when it comes to building psych safety, it gets into, so let's start to study some of the behaviors, right? Build psychological safety versus potentially tear it down. And we're going to get into those in a bit, but you know, um, when a team is not feeling a strong sense of team psychological safety, we might in getting in there and doing that discovery work to discern what's at the root of this, we might get to a place where people know they matter here, but we're still struggling, right? And oftentimes when that's the case, there's just a disconnect between what a leader wants to do, what behaviors they want to bring forward, right? Because they know they build psychological safety, and the behaviors that they're actually demonstrating, right?
Yeah.
And when we
Yeah.
get into that work, that's the tough work of leadership, but it's the right work, right? You believe, in these things. Your people truly do feel like they matter, and
Hmm.
yet you're still scoring low on these psych safety indicators. What's going on there? Oh, and we've even done some of this training around it. What's going on there? Well, if you go in and observe, you're a fly on the wall in some of these moments, you'll see that the behaviors are still right. They're still working on those behaviors. Oh, I still actually am. I cut people off. I still do that.
Yeah.
I'm working on it, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm actually pretty close minded, and I don't. I'm trying to be more open minded, but my tendency is this, right? Or when I hear an opposing idea or opinion, right, I kind of still shut it down. That's my
Hmm.
default. I'm
Hmm.
mindful of it, right? I know it breaks it, but so that's the place we love getting into and really doing that important growth work with leaders. But when it comes to getting started, if we've got this foundation, right, then we get into the work of how do I grow in these different areas from breaker to builder of psych safety.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that. And I know we're going to get into some of these very specific ways that we can build and break here in just a little bit. But, given that we kind of are emphasizing the importance of helping people to feel like they truly matter on our team, I wonder if, like, maybe just for a few minutes we could talk about like what can we do to increase that sense on teams of people feeling like that's true. Like it sounds,
yeah,
I know in some ways it feels,
yeah,
at least for myself, I can say this can feel a little counterintuitive because I feel I want all of this, like the answer to this question to be like, well, it's just totally authentic and spontaneous. And I
yeah,
don't need to do much engineering and
yeah,
planning around like how I help people to feel like they matter. I just want to be a person who's always just emanating that, right? And the truth is, maybe I do sometimes, but probably other times I don't. And so I wonder how can we, yeah, how
yeah.
do people practice a little bit of this like cultivation of helping the people they work with to feel like they matter?
Yeah, well, I think maybe it's maybe the two-part frame to consider here is it's generally in how we show up, right? So there is this organic component to this where we're just mindful in terms of how we show up with people on our team. And, if we're mindful of that and we prioritize truly noticing, their life, their behaviors, their strengths, their wins,
Mm.
if we're noticing
Yeah.
those things and how we show up and we're recognizing them, and we're connecting with them, asking them curious questions about what's going on in their world.
Yeah.
But then, I do think you have to build this into your system, right? And into your
Yeah.
workflow, right?
Yeah.
You with direct reports, right? Make sure that you've got dedicated routines around checking in. And, sometimes people say, oh, well, then it's disingenuous from the start. No, we've seen, countless um, scenarios where there was a pre-planned moment for connection, right? Or for
Hmm.
creating a sense of belonging and relationship, and it was wildly successful, right? I mean, the simple check-in question at the beginning of a leadership team meeting or a one-on-one can work wonders in terms of showing people that you care, taking genuine interest in them as a human being and not just an employee or a teammate. But I think it's how we show up, right? Maybe first, because that's just your day-to-day posture and
Hmm.
how you lead. But it's building it into your workflow as a leader as well.
Yeah, I love that, Joe. And I'm reminded of something, a mantra that I know has meant a lot to you that you've shared with me. It's this idea of being unattached to the outcome. And in this context, I mean, like, I know as a leader who's led a lot of one-on-ones in my career, I've often come to those hoping to get through a certain set of action items and agenda items, but was always committed to like checking in at the beginning. And what I learned over time is like I had to often abandon what I hoped would happen in that meeting if something came up that
Hmm.
they shared,
Hmm.
like in getting to know them, that was worthy of me leaning in, right? Like, ooh, I heard something that was like, this person' daughter is struggling with this eating disorder. Like,
Yeah.
we just need to like actually stay there for 10 more minutes, right? You know, if they're open to it, right? Not forcibly, but if they want to, and that's the way, like, and again, an authentic way. None of
Yeah.
this can be manipulated or
Oh no.
manufactured, right? But
Yeah.
I want to get I that matters, and that's more important right now than this other thing that I'd hoped we would get through.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine if you're listening, right, you've had some of those moments where you prioritized the person, right, over
Mm,
the work. And that's a moment that that person doesn't forget,
yeah,
right?
that's
They're
right.
like, oh man, we just spent the whole one-on-one talking about this thing related to me, and now I have a whole different sense of the degree to which you see me, you care
Hmm.
about me, right? And at the end of the day, the
Totally.
work's got to happen too, right? So you figure out a way to make the work happen as well.
Right.
You do
Absolutely.
that, right? You can't do that every one-on-one for the full 30 minutes or whatever it is, right? But those moments are powerful.
Totally.
All right, well, I'm gonna move us to our next question here. So, what's the next question two here? What is the relationship between vulnerability and building trust? And maybe to extend it, we can get into in building psychological safety as well.
Yeah. I don't know that this is the best place to start, but I think the thing is just top of mind for me, Joe, and we'll see if you want to dive into this or if you want to take us a different place. Um, I think, when we're teaching teams on the importance of vulnerability, I think sometimes we're there's some people that are just like, yes, like totally, right, and other people are like very skeptical, and they're kind of like, I don't know, like how is this actually going to help us come together, achieve greater results, and I think like the extreme versions of this are like, are we just going to be showing up and spilling our guts and work every day, and I think what we've learned is there's a certain type of vulnerability that actually, in a positive way, works to build trust. And it's a vulnerability. It's a vulnerability that comes with a sense that doesn't how do I say it? Doesn't erode a sense that you're or makes you less dependable, right? And so sometimes if you're sharing, and and the person on the other side of you gets a sense that um, you're learning something from this, or it's just a movement for you to admit something in front of the team. Like they're seeing a movement in you, right? A positive movement. Maybe you were someone who didn't share much and now you are. And so that alone is really significant. Maybe you're sharing something that was hard to share and you're learning something from it, and you're sharing what that learning is. It's since you're kind of like telling the team, whether you're saying it directly or it's just a sense that like your this vulnerability is actually making you a better teammate because they have a sense that you're learning, right? And so there's kind of like this, it's like a combination of a vulnerability and a bit of accountability
Yeah.
that really does work to build trust versus if you're just someone who just shows up and is vulnerable for the vulnerability's sake, and the teammates are starting to wonder, like I don't. This seems to be a recurring thing that's actually making me feel like this person might be less dependable. That might, yeah, that might feel not exactly like the recipe to get to higher trust.
Yeah. Breaking down, vulnerability into like what when it's really impactful, right? What's true about it is this, you know, thing that we've sort of worked to unpack for years now. And I think you're getting at this important piece and its relationship with an impact on reliability or dependability, and it really not. I think part of that is, um, it comes from a real place of purpose. There's purpose behind this moment of, and vulnerability, and the other
Mm,
person can feel that,
yeah.
right? It's I want you to know this, right, for a specific reason, most likely. And these also are not always pre-planned, right? There's lots of vulnerability is happening more responsively, right, than proactively. But there's also this, there's just this gut instinct, right, that helps you to know, is this a good moment to just be a bit more open and share this, because I think it's important for this person to know. And if you're on the receiving end of vulnerability, an effective version of it, you see it, right? You can just tell, right? That was a real moment of authenticity, right? I've only gained more respect, right, from what they shared there, as opposed to, right, what we're not saying is, the maybe the non-example of leaders trying to demonstrate vulnerability because it's a buzzword, is that we're just sort of kind of always sharing these things that we're struggling with, and um, there's no filter. It
Hmm.
winds up sounding excusey, right, at
Hmm.
times.
Yeah.
But as we get into this, I think one of the things that I like to pull out is that err on the side of trying to do it, right, trying to bring it. A lot of us are really, our default is not to do it. And so progress comes in the form of taking action and trying to, bring it when you sense that that's going to be an important thing for that
Yeah.
space, whether it's with your
Yeah.
team or your. And so I think maybe, if we go back to this question, how does it help to build trust? Right. So why when we're vulnerable, does that impact trust and psychological safety in a positive way?
Yeah, well, I think because it makes people, like, I think it gives permission to folks, right? I think it especially if I think this is increasingly important, like the higher up you are in an organizational structure, right? So people start to see there's permission to admit when I do wrong, and to because it really helps teams to learn, right? If we're just showing up without like having the safety to admit that we're doing something wrong, then I think we often are wonder like how are we actually improving here, right? But when we give voice to the things that we could have done better, or the mistakes that we made, it then can really become this contagious thing on teams where they then are like, "Oh, this for the sake of learning and us growing together, like there's a great opportunity for us to share the things that we wish would be going better or I could have
Yeah,
done differently."
absolutely.
All right, so we're back. This episode took two different times to record because Joe had a bit of an emergency in St. Louis. What happened, Joe?
Yeah, sadly, we had a tornado touchdown in the city of St. Louis. So yeah, you saw the lighting in my room sort of change over the first part of the episode, and yeah, it was scary. And we had some pretty significant destruction and some people displaced, and yeah, it was sad. Fortunately, people are responding really well to it. Hit a few different areas, and yeah,
Yeah, well, it's funny because Joe's like texting me apologizing for having to get off the end of the pod early, and like meanwhile within hours we both are learning that it was a really serious tornado and weather event. Um, yeah, so glad y'all are all right.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. All right. Well, let's pick back up. So we were just getting ready to hop into question two, which is uh, what's the relationship between vulnerability and building trust?
Yeah, well, I thought maybe a good place to start would be a look at a concept in Jacob Morgan's book, Leading with Vulnerability. I like this one in particular because this is a podcast for growing strong leadership teams and really just showing up with more intention as a leader. He's got a framework in the book that's called the vulnerability wheel. And I'm not going to try and unpack this visual, but it is a helpful visual if you're interested in checking out his book. But the most important part is at the center of it, of the wheel, is intention. And really, what you see in the visual is that everything kind of reverberates out from this intention. So, specifically, when it comes to vulnerability, how do we bring intention to sharing and opening up and being more vulnerable on our teams? Right. So, a couple examples of this might be it's really just asking the question to ourselves: why are we sharing what we're about to share? Right. And so two examples might be a CEO who's hard charging, known for being hard charging and almost always unflappable. And she decides to open up,
Hmm.
not just to appear weak, but to remind her team that she's human too.
Hmm.
Right. And then another example might be a key team member who admits to a mistake, not just for the sake of confessing it, but to share what they've learned and hopefully create a permission structure on that team for others to do the same, to share what they're learning from the mistakes that they're making. So two very different examples, but like what you can see is that there's intention behind each of these.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's making me think that one of the best ways to understand how vulnerability helps to build trust is to just think back to a moment where you were on the other side of that type of behavior and just think about how the impact that it had on you and your relationship with that person. And I can almost guarantee that you'll feel like in that moment, because of that moment of intention and authenticity, where someone was sharing something that they most likely felt was a bit risky,
Hmm.
you felt that you strengthened trust in that
Yeah,
moment, right?
yeah,
So I think some of the best is just go back to your experiences where that's happened to you and think about what was the impact on your relationship from a trust perspective. I think this also helps to answer the question of, a lot of times people, it's a chicken or the eggs sort of thing.
hmm,
Like,
yeah,
can we do vulnerability without trust? And I think, ultimately they go hand in hand, and one, they have this sort of, um, snowball effect. As you're building trust, you feel like you can do more authentic vulnerability and build more trust. But I think the first step is just stepping into a moment of intentional sharing and vulnerability, and see that trust build,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Not the only way you can build trust, but it's a great deliberate way to bring that and to
yeah,
build that with people on your team.
yeah. It's great. And I think, as I'm just hearing myself talk there, I think one thing I want to also add is that we're kind of sharing some criteria, right? A bit of criteria for how do I know when to be vulnerable. But at the same time, I think what we don't want to communicate is that you always have to know this ahead of time, right? Sometimes, just like you said, Joe, looking back to the person who was vulnerable across the room from you or the Zoom from you, we can also do that for ourselves, right? Like we, even if we weren't clear ahead of time, we can go back and think about that moment and ask ourselves, what did I accomplish? What do I think that moment of sharing accomplished with my team? Right. And through that little carrying that retrospective mindset about the way we're showing up with our team and the moments we're choosing to be vulnerable, I think you're just naturally going to get better and say, oh, that was a moment that I think I got a little bit more connected to that person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there might be times when you're just like, as I look back on that, I don't know that it accomplished much of anything. And so maybe those are times where you're like, learn about that and maybe don't share some. Yeah, just
Yeah.
it's gonna become more clear and subconscious the more you do that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Makes me think that, like, as we're all in our leadership journey and trying to discern how to best step into moments of vulnerability. I think if we were to look back on these moments where we maybe, made a decision to be vulnerable, one of the indicators of the overall effectiveness or success of that moment was how do we feel like it impacted the relationship
Mhm.
in that moment?
Yeah,
Did it further strengthen, or did it potentially, harm the relationship? And harming the relationship can happen, right? In these moments where we're just putting it all out there, right? Maybe in a very in a not thoughtful way, right? And we're oversharing, and then we have that, well, I thought I was just being vulnerable. Well, if the impact was that it actually maybe harmed the relationship or somehow, diminished something, let's unpack what you did that drove to that, and create some growth in that moment.
that's great. And I think what I hear you saying here, Joe, is that just being vulnerable will not automatically and naturally build trust, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I should say, I think it probably begs a question of the definition of being vulnerable. So maybe if you are truly being vulnerable, maybe it's likely to build trust and connection. But if you're just sort of sharing something that feels like you're opening up, but it's actually not you being vulnerable, right? Because maybe that's just easy. Maybe you're the type of person who shows up and shares about your personal stuff a lot, right? That might actually be like faux vulnerability because at the surface level, if no one knew you, they might drop into that and say, "Oh, that person's being vulnerable." But your teammates might look at it that know you and say, "Well, that's a tendency this person has, and that's actually not hard for them because that's their regular way of operating." And so
Yeah.
that's probably not vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, when we talk about this, we know that there are many ways in which people are defining it. And I think when people define it with a high bar for what vulnerability looks like, that's almost always going to drive more trust and strength in a relationship. But if we adopt maybe a broader, less high bar for what vulnerability is,
Hmm.
we are going to see these moments where it's not helpful. And again, if anyone who's listening here, we've probably been in a moment where that was the case for us, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yep.
someone shared a whole bunch, and it was most likely a pattern for that person as well. They're doing this on a regular basis. Nothing about what they're doing feels like it's actually risky, a sense of risk to them, right? They're just sharing. And so in those moments, we start to lose credibility, right? For that leader in those moments. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
this is
great.
good.
Awesome. Well, why don't we move on to our third question? So our third question is, what are the behaviors that break psych safety?
Yeah. Wait, so our behaviors can break psych safety? Oh my
Yes,
god.
yeah. This is
No.
perhaps the big insight for today. The
Yeah.
ways we show up and act can break psych safety on teams.
Right. Yeah. So that's number one, right? Is just um putting that in front of our face, right? And saying, hey, leaders, our behavior is the number one thing that drives psych safety on a team. And
Mm,
so,
yeah.
um, not to make it feel overly dramatic, but it is every behavior of ours, right? We have this chance to subtly build or break
Mm,
psych safety amongst our team.
mm,
And
yeah.
so it is something that doesn't happen, only in one moment. It happens over time. But the number one thing for teams who are um, in search of strengthening team psychological safety because they know how important it is to embrace this idea that my behavior is what impacts the psych safety on our team, right? And then ultimately, if I'm a team leader, really bringing that message to everyone and noticing for everyone that your behavior is also going to impact the psych safety amongst this team. Managers, team leaders have an outsized impact, right? We know that through the research, but our behaviors impact. So in our builders and breakers um, one pager that we'll share in the show notes, we highlight the 5 dimensions of building psych safety. I think the first dimension is the one that is actually maybe the easiest place to start, at least from an awareness perspective. And it's this idea of our general disposition, right? Sort of our general posture in terms of how we show up with people. And if you just, paint a picture, think about two different people that you're meeting for the first time. And the first person, and let's bring it into a business, work context, so that you know that you probably need to be accomplishing something with this person. Uh, the first person comes in with an open mind, curiosity, a bit of warmth to them, an open body posture, um, a sense of humility, versus someone who's a little frostier, to use your words, right? Somebody
Yeah.
who's a little more
Yeah.
closed, a little more reserved, um, not super curious. And just imagine how you would feel 5 minutes into those two conversations as it relates to psych safety and your comfort with just sort of diving in and sharing ideas, and it's dramatic, right? And just the reality is, though, that those two different types of leaders are all over our workplaces, right? And so some people just have this natural disposition that creates psych safety. And, you know, so great for those people that that's their default. If that's not your default, it doesn't mean you're a bad leader. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. You may just have some default, disposition that doesn't naturally create as much psychological safety. So the first thing that we ask, leaders to reflect on is, where do you sort of fall on this end of the spectrum, and begin building some awareness around that, and working to help to move yourself along that spectrum.
Yeah,
Where
that's
we
great.
start. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
I
do you
love
think?
that, Joe. Joe, and it makes me think, we, like you mentioned, we call these the builders and breakers of psych safety, but even just hearing you talk about the disposition piece and the way you feel when someone with an open, positive, joyful, encouraging disposition, well, what is it? What do you want to do? You want to build. Like, you want to the conversation builds, the relationship builds, the
Yeah.
connection builds, right?
Yeah.
It's called a builder, but it literally builds so many things when your disposition is there, is when you're bringing attention to it. And maybe to your point, this isn't asking. Yes, some people are natural disposition is a little bit more closed or reserved. And for those people, we're not saying you have to become the person who's on the other end of the spectrum. But if you know that about yourself, you probably do need to do some work, right? To get 10 to 20%, like, to the side where you are at least signaling that, you want to hear the other person's perspective. It's giving these, most of the time, subconscious signals to people that you're
Yeah.
very interested in them, like you care about them, right? You want to know what they have to say. These are the ways we're receiving these things. And when someone's closed, we're subconsciously just sort of like holding back and being reserved, right? And so,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm going to
Yeah.
say, respond there, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, if you're listening and you are identifying with this more closed posture, okay, don't be one of those leaders who has the broken mindset of, that's just the way I am, right? And miss the fact that it is very impactful on your effectiveness in the workplace. A lot of us, it's not even a lack of growth mindset in the moment of, like, I can't grow into a different person. It's just a lack of appreciation for the impact of that disposition, right? A lot of us just sort of say, like, yeah, that's kind of the way I am. People have been telling me that's the way that I am. And so that's just the way that I am, And so it's just, that's my starting point. And what I want to share with those leaders in those moments is, that's okay, but if you work to actually address this, you're going to be that much more impactful as a leader, as a teammate, right? And of course you can, right? I mean, we're growth mindset to the max, right? At
Yeah,
Six Levers, right? So
right.
of course you can, but it's
Yeah,
it's sometimes it's just a lack of appreciation for how impactful that posture is.
yeah, absolutely. Totally, I love that. Yeah, and I love that, just the emphasis on the like the broken mindset. And Joe knows this, but sometimes I call these bad agreements, right? Meaning, just like, we've agreed to something that we think is true, but it's not really true, right? And it doesn't have to be true, I should say, right? It might be the evidence to date, but it doesn't have to be the way things continue in the future about how you show up in those moments. And so that's awesome. Maybe the second one, there's a lot to unpack in builders and breakers, but maybe we'll go to one more here. And I think, kind of, when we survey rooms, or just kind of get the pulse on, like, and ask people, in your own experiences, what were the moments in which you felt like your trust was broken on a team or with an individual? I
Hmm.
think the thing we probably hear more than anything is the way someone responded to an idea that I had.
Yeah,
Right? I think that's like the
absolutely.
top of mind thing people usually say is how I respond,
Hmm.
or how they responded to me is the thing that feels almost top of mind all the time when they think about the trust and psych safety on a team.
Hmm.
So this is a really important one. Sometimes we inadvertently break when we appear to be closed off. This is another one that's kind of related to disposition because it can be body language, but this one can also, it shows up probably in the most harmful way when it's more about the things that we say, right? The things that we're dismissive,
Hmm.
or we just move on, right? Like we kind of ignore it altogether. Someone shares something really important and we're just like, well, we don't really have time for that, so we're going to move on to this other thing right now,
Yeah.
right? So
And that one in particular is one that people are most unaware that they do, right? That sort of
yeah,
just like glossing over an idea. And as a, as we sit in and observe some of these meetings, these sessions, we
yeah,
see that happen and we thought, oh, they don't even know what they just did. But the
right.
person over
Yeah.
there feels like they don't want to share, right, anymore because you just
Yeah.
glossed over that point of that
It's
idea, that point of feedback.
yeah. It's so true. This I think especially is true if you're in a team meeting context and you're a leader who's tasked with like facilitating, right? Because you've got multiple things on your mind, right? Where you can, if you're trying to move the team along, sometimes you don't even realize you dismiss someone in your mind. You're just like, we've got like 30 minutes left in the meeting, and I know we've got these two big things that we need to dive into today, and we haven't even got there yet. And so, yeah, cool, Joe, but we got to move on, right? And
Right.
so we're just moving on. Meanwhile, Joe's shared his like the thing that felt most important for him to share with the team, and it nobody heard it, right? It just got dismissed and moved on. So there is, I mean, I think there is some grace in saying leaders are many times unaware that they're doing this, but it has a big impact, and it ultimately can impact the willingness of someone sharing that idea the next time they
Yeah.
have one.
Yeah, that little example, Sean, has me thinking about maybe a new insight for myself, which is, the context of the conversation, um, I think influences how we show up, um, when it and how we respond specifically. So it's making me maybe a little bit of a moment of vulnerability for me here would be what I've found is that when I am sort of the steward of a project or the subject matter expert within a conversation, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about the topic that we're talking about, right? So I'm sort of the person who spent the most amount of time, and here I am in a setting where I want to get feedback, right? I want to get, and so it's designed to get feedback from
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
But what I've found myself do at times is almost shut down ideas the moment that they come back because I've already thought through the thing,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
I've got and in those moments, I think what I've heard in feedback to me afterwards is, hey, I didn't disagree with your idea. You've obviously spent way more time on this than I have. But in that moment when you shared that, it sort of just shut me down. It made me feel like I didn't even want to be a part of the conversation. And so I guess the learning for me here is that, in different contexts, we might show up with a little bit of a different um, posture, and just to be mindful of how that impacts us or how that impacts the others that we're collaborating with in those moments.
I love that insight, Joe. I was seeing a little two by two in my mind as you were sharing that, and it's like the more investment and or work we've put into a project or idea or concept, probably inherently we are more likely to be closed off to opposing views, right?
Yeah.
It may not be always true
Yeah.
based on who we are as individuals, but when I was hearing you say that, I was like, oh, I could totally imagine feeling that way. Like if I'm fired up, excited, I've done all this stuff, and I come in and I share the idea, and I met with some opposing views, the more work time, passion, my own internal investment that I've made into the thing, probably the less likely I'm going to be to just be open to the opposing views. So that's just an awareness thing, right? If that's true, that feels totally true. Like I'm like, okay, I know this. I'm about to share this idea. I'm really excited about it. and I really hope that everyone else sees it exactly the same way I do, right?
Right. Right.
That they may not because they're not where I am yet, and I need to know that and be okay with it going into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm going into that actually, because a lot of times I think this shows up where leaders are going into that conversation with the intention, at least on paper, of getting feedback and getting actual ideas. And so if that's truly
Yeah,
what you
right.
need to do,
Yeah,
then you need to be ready to check yourself when you have that emotional reaction to some of the feedback, because that's natural. We don't expect you to not have your feelings. It's that choice to how are you going to respond when somebody shares this idea that opposes or diverges the direction of this thing that you've been working on. How do you come prepared to respond in a thoughtful way and in a way that builds and furthers psych safety within your team?
yeah. And I think at the heart of that, you may realize, well, I really only wanted feedback on like the edges, like the 5 to 10% adjustments, but
Yeah.
I really expected everyone to be in
Yeah.
on the whole, the meat of the substance of
Yes.
the idea.
Facilitation design. Yeah, better, facilitation there.
Yeah,
Don't ask for feedback on everything if
right,
you don't want it.
right.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, cool. Well, let's
That's good.
let's uh let's wrap up here. Um, Joe, what is the one move that leadership teams can make to start making progress and building a culture of psych safety and trust on their team?
Yeah. Well, my favorite one here is to actually pull up our Builders and Breakers one pager and run a retrospective with your leadership team. You hear us share this a lot, a little bit of a superstructure that we like to call out, but it's pulling that up, giving everyone 5 or so minutes to review the different dimensions. What does building in that dimension look like? What does breaking in that dimension look like? Um, Notice where you think you might have strengths, where you might have some gaps, and then have a dialogue about it, right? Whip around and hear from everyone. Where are some of your strengths? You know, support each other through that dialogue. Where are some of my areas for growth? In that part of the conversation, there may be an opportunity to be vulnerable, right? So just be prepared for that, because you may have to share something that is a breaker. Maybe you don't want to admit it. Maybe you're working on it, but it's been hard. So you may need to be vulnerable and be ready for others to be vulnerable. Um, and ultimately, sort of just call to action after that is everyone working. What's one thing that you want to work on as it relates to building psych safety? uh, Great team exercise. You do it once and you come back to it 30, 60, 90 days later, and you're going to start to see it stick. So key coming back to it at some point, but starting with that retrospective can be super powerful.
I love that. We've seen the power of that with so many teams. So we know firsthand that this can have a big impact on beginning to build psych safety. So great one. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of Leading Together. If you found it valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a review. It helps more leadership teams to discover these conversations. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And just a reminder, you can always find more resources at sixlevers.co. Until next time, remember to take that one step towards becoming a more cohesive leadership team.